noises coming from the walls and from the ceiling. Ah! Susie. Stop it!
We trust TV to entertain us, inform us, and sometimes even make us laugh. But what happens when the cameras capture something they were never meant to show? Or when a seemingly harmless broadcast takes a turn no one could predict? From tragedy striking live on air to chilling confessions that shocked the world,
the last minutes of Becky's life were spent in fear and pain and terror.
We're exploring 10 of the darkest moments in TV history. A story told by 60 Minutes. What if you closed your eyes one day and opened them 10 years later? What if the world had moved on, but you were stuck in time? That's the haunting story of Donald Herbert, a firefighter, a husband, a father, and a hero whose extraordinary journey was shared with millions on 60 Minutes. For over 50 years, 60 Minutes has been America's go-to news program. Known for its sharp investigative journalism, powerful interviews, and unforgettable human stories, it's earned 25 Peabody Awards and a place in television history. But one of its most emotional stories was about Don, a man whose life took a heartbreaking turn on December 28, 1995. That day, Don was doing what he did best, fighting fires and saving lives in Buffalo, New York. Flames roared through a house as cameras from local news stations captured every moment. Don was on the roof when disaster struck. The roof caved in, and he plummeted into the burning attic below. Trapped, out of oxygen, and unconscious, Don's fate seemed sealed. His fellow firefighters didn't give up. They fought through smoke, fire, and debris to pull him out. Against all odds, they saved his life. But the damage was devastating. Don was left blind, unable to speak, and with severe brain damage. Doctors delivered the crushing news: he would never recover. Soon after, Don slipped into a minimally conscious state, a coma-like condition where he couldn't eat, talk, or understand the world around him. For nearly a decade, Don lived in a nursing home, sustained by a feeding tube. His family visited, hoping for a miracle, but the years dragged on with little change. Then something incredible happened. 10 years later, after doctors adjusted his medications, Don's eyes suddenly opened, and then he spoke. His first words, "I want to talk to my wife." For the next 14 hours, Don talked non-stop with his family. He asked about his sons, his friends, and everything he'd missed over the last decade. The room was filled with tears, laughter, and sheer disbelief. The cameras of 60 Minutes captured this emotional reunion, sharing it with the world. But the story didn't stop there. As Don tried to adjust to his new life, the emotional and physical toll became clear. He would often thrash violently in his sleep, as though he was still trapped in that attic. The trauma was deeply embedded in his mind, and his body couldn't fully recover from years of inactivity and damage. Just 1 year after his miraculous awakening, Don passed away from pneumonia and complications related to his injuries. It leaves us with a question. If you woke up after 10 years, what would you say first? And perhaps more importantly, who would you want to see waiting by your side? The criminal who fooled America. How do you spot a monster when they're smiling into the camera, winning over an audience, and selling a story of redemption, all while hiding a chilling secret? That's exactly what Edward Wayne Edwards did when he appeared on the classic game show To Tell the Truth in 1972. For decades, To Tell the Truth entertained viewers with its clever mix of mystery and celebrity banter. Contestants would present themselves as someone notable, while two imposters tried to trick the celebrity panel into believing they were the real deal. But on that particular episode, the stakes were much higher than a few wrong guesses. The spotlight was on Edward Wayne Edwards, a man who had once been on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. He was introduced as a reformed criminal who had left behind a life of robbery, forgery, and prison escapes. Contestant number 3, Edwards himself, stood there confidently, smiling as he spun a story about redemption and second chances. In his 1972 memoir, Metamorphosis of a Criminal, Edwards boldly admitted that he never wore a mask during his robberies because, in his own words, "I was Ed Edwards, master crook, and I wanted the world to know it." At the time, viewers believed they were seeing a man who had turned his life around. A story of hope wrapped in a game show's fun format, but the truth was far more sinister. Fast forward to the late 2000s. Edwards had faded from public view, living a seemingly quiet life. But his daughter April started connecting the dots. She grew suspicious of her father's past, began researching cold cases, and stumbled upon connections that made her stomach turn. In 2009, April contacted the police with her findings. Soon after, Edwards was arrested. The charming man who had once smiled for millions on national television confessed to 5 brutal murders, 2 in 1980, a young couple in 1977, and his own foster son in 1996. Investigators believe his body count might have been much higher. Some estimates suggest he was linked to at least 15 unsolved cases. And as details of his crimes came to light, wild conspiracies began to swirl. Some even speculated that Edward Wayne Edwards might have been the infamous Zodiac killer. Whether or not the Zodiac connection holds any truth, one fact remains chillingly clear. Edward Wayne Edwards was a master manipulator. He didn't just fool his victims. He fooled an entire nation, smiling in front of cameras while carrying the weight of horrific crimes. The Vetan Das Accident. What happens when entertainment pushes the limits just a little too far? When a live audience, millions of viewers, and a young dreamer all collide in a moment no one can take back. That's the unforgettable story of Vetan Das, Europe's most popular television show, and a stunt gone wrong. For decades, Vetan Das was a must-watch event across Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Ordinary people would come on stage to perform outlandish, funny, or downright jaw-dropping stunts. A-list celebrities, Cameron Diaz, Justin Bieber, Tom Hanks, were frequent guests, adding Hollywood flair to the mix. At the end of each episode, the audience would vote for the best performance. But on December 4, 2010, one stunt would change the show forever. Enter Samuel Koch, a 23-year-old stuntman in training with big dreams and a fearless spirit. He had one goal: to make his mark on the world of action and performance. That night, with his mother watching from the stands and cameras capturing her every reaction, Samuel was set to attempt something few had dared before. The challenge? Jump over 5 moving cars using spring-loaded boots, also known as kangaroo shoes. These boots, designed to give extra bounce and height, would help him clear each vehicle. The cars, driven by people he trusted, including his father, would approach only when Samuel gave the signal. The show opened with Samuel's stunt. The first car sped forward, and Samuel sailed over it with ease. The crowd cheered. But on the approach of the second car, something felt off. Samuel stepped aside, spoke briefly with the driver, and reset himself. He nailed the third car flawlessly. But then came car number 4. Driven by his father, it was the longest jump yet, and the tension was palpable. Samuel signaled, his father accelerated, and Samuel launched himself into the air. It happened in an instant. His jump was too low. His head clipped the windshield, and the impact sent him spinning through the air. The live audience gasped. The cameras cut to the shocked face of a judge, and Samuel hit the ground, face first. He didn't move. The chaos was immediate. Paramedics rushed in. The host, visibly shaken, announced that the show would be cancelled for the evening. The weight of what had just happened was unbearable. Millions of viewers were left staring at their screens in silence. Samuel survived, but the damage was catastrophic. 2 vertebrae were shattered, his spinal cord was irreparably damaged, and he was left paralyzed from the neck down. The weight of the accident wasn't just physical, it was emotional. His father had been behind the wheel of that 4th car, a fact that carried unimaginable guilt. The aftermath was heavy. The host resigned shortly after the broadcast, unable to continue. Vetan Das, once a symbol of daring fun, would never quite recover from the tragedy. But Samuel's story didn't end there. Despite his injuries, he went on to star in films like A Head Full of Honey, 4 Days in May, and 15 Years. He became a symbol of resilience, a man who refused to let a single moment define his entire life. The Family Feud tragedy. Game shows are supposed to be light-hearted fun, a chance for families to bond, crack jokes, and maybe walk away with some prize money. Family Feud is no exception. With Steve Harvey at the helm since 2010, the show has delivered countless funny moments, awkward answers, and Steve's signature look of disbelief when someone says something outrageous. But sometimes behind the laughter and bright lights lies a darker story. In January 2020, Timothy Bleefnick and his family stepped onto the Family Feud stage, flashing smiles and waving to the cameras. They played well, they laughed, and they even walked away as winners. But one moment stood out, and not in a good way. When Steve Harvey asked Timothy, "What's the biggest mistake you made at your wedding?" Timothy paused, smirked, and delivered the now infamous response, "Saying I do." The audience gasped, Steve gave his signature wide-eyed look, and even Timothy's wife, Rebecca, seemed uncomfortable. While jokes like this are common on Family Feud, this one hit differently. It was brushed off at the time, but looking back it feels chilling. Fast forward to 2023, Timothy and Rebecca's marriage had fallen apart. Though they hadn't officially divorced, they were living in separate homes. Things weren't just tense, they were dangerous. Rebecca had filed for a restraining order against Timothy and his father, citing fears for her safety. On February 23, 2023, tragedy struck. Loud bangs were heard from Rebecca's home, and later a family member discovered her lifeless body. She had been shot 14 times, her bedroom door kicked in. The peaceful suburban home had become the scene of a brutal crime. It didn't take long for investigators to turn their attention to Timothy. On March 13th, he was arrested and later convicted of homicide. The smiling contestant from Family Feud, the man cracking jokes with Steve Harvey, was now a convicted murderer. In August 2023, Timothy was sentenced to life in prison. The charming family from one of America's most beloved game shows had become the face of an unthinkable tragedy. It's hard not to think back to that moment on the Family Feud stage. The joke, the awkward laughter, and Steve Harvey's stunned expression. Could anyone have known what was coming? Could anyone have predicted that a light-hearted game show moment would later feel like a haunting warning? This story leaves us with one chilling question. How well do we really know the people who make us laugh on TV? The story of Renard Spivey. We've all seen courtroom reality shows, the ones filled with wild arguments, over-the-top disputes, and moments that leave you laughing out loud. Christina's Court was one of those shows. Hosted by Judge Christina Perez, it had all the drama, humor, and outrageous cases you'd expect from a hit daytime series. But one particular moment from the show would become hauntingly unforgettable years later. In one of the show's most viral episodes, comedian Shan Harris stood before Judge Christina, suing his ex-girlfriend over unpaid rent. The case was light-hearted, packed with jokes, and had the audience in stitches. At one point, Judge Christina turned to her trusted bailiff Renard Spivey and asked how long he'd been married. With a straight face, Spivey replied, 27 years. That's when Harris delivered the joke that would go down in reality TV history. Look at him, he looks mad. The courtroom erupted in laughter. Even Spivey cracked a smile. It was a feel-good moment, one of those snippets you'd share with your friends. But no one knew then just how darkly prophetic that joke would become. Fast forward to 2019, nearly a decade after the show aired. Renard Spivey, once the calm and composed courtroom presence, found himself at the center of a tragedy. Spivey and his wife Patricia were locked in a heated argument in their home. The fight reportedly stemmed from accusations of steroid use and infidelity. Emotions escalated, words turned sharp, and in the chaos, Renard reached for his firearm. 2 shots were fired. Patricia Spivey was killed. When police arrived at the scene, they found Patricia's body in a bedroom closet and Renard suffering from a gunshot wound to his leg, one he claimed was accidental. The trial that followed was as shocking as the crime itself. Court documents revealed a messy picture, conflicting accounts, an emotional breakdown, and no clear motive. In the end, the court ruled the shooting was unintentional. Spivey was found not guilty. For fans of Christina's Court, the news was hard to digest. How could the soft-spoken bailiff who stood by Judge Christina's side for years be involved in something so tragic? The Ghostwatch incident. Can a TV show really break a nation? On Halloween night in 1992, the BBC found out the hard way when they aired Ghostwatch. A program so unsettling it left viewers in tears, sparked thousands of angry phone calls, and even sent people to the hospital. But how did a scripted TV special spiral so out of control? It all started with what seemed like the perfect Halloween broadcast. Hosted by the highly respected Michael Parkinson, Ghostwatch promised to be a live investigation into paranormal activity happening in an ordinary London home. The story followed a family plagued by a menacing spirit they had nicknamed Mr. Pipes. Veteran BBC reporter Sarah Green was on site at the supposedly haunted house. while Parkinson and a skeptic analyzed events from the studio. At first, the investigation felt slow. No ghostly figures appeared, no objects flew across the room, and the skeptic confidently dismissed everything as psychological tricks. Sarah even caught one of the children faking a paranormal event. For a brief moment, it seemed like the whole thing was just harmless Halloween entertainment. But then things escalated, fast. A chilling voice echoed from a family member, Suzanne, as she hid behind a couch. Her voice wasn't her own. Shadows began to move. Strange sounds filled the home. Back in the studio, Parkinson and the skeptic started to look genuinely unsettled. By the end of the broadcast, the supposed live investigation had turned into full-on chaos. The seance that unfolded on screen didn't just seem to summon Mr. Pipes, it seemed to tear a hole between reality and fiction. Lights flickered in the studio, an eerie wind blew through the newsroom, and Parkinson, now visibly dazed, began muttering the children's rhyme, "Round and round the garden like a teddy bear." The camera cut to black. What most viewers didn't realize was that Ghostwatch wasn't live at all. It was pre-recorded, scripted, and entirely fictional. The show even opened with a disclaimer explaining this, but hardly anyone noticed or remembered. To the millions of people glued to their screens that night, everything they had just seen felt terrifyingly real. The fallout was immediate and intense. The BBC received over 30,000 phone calls from panicked viewers. Michael Parkinson's own mother reportedly called him in tears, convinced her son had been in danger. Hospitals treated multiple viewers for symptoms of PTSD, and parents reported their children suffering from nightmares for weeks after the broadcast. But the scariest part wasn't the staged seance or the flickering lights. It was the way Ghostwatch blurred the line between fiction and reality so effectively that it caused nationwide hysteria. In the aftermath, the BBC was heavily criticized. They promised never to air Ghostwatch again, and to this day, it remains one of the most infamous broadcasts in television history. So how much responsibility does a network have when entertainment crosses the line? And perhaps more chillingly, what happens when fiction feels more real than reality itself? When a game show stopped, who doesn't love a good game show? Bright lights, competitive spirit, laughter, and the thrill of victory. It's TV magic. That's exactly what K7 Panama, a popular Chilean television series, brought to living rooms across the country. Teams of young adults pushed their strength, balance, and endurance to the limit, all while sharing their stories, their families, dreams, and struggles. It was light-hearted, fun, and family-friendly entertainment. But in 2011, during an ordinary Friday broadcast, K7 Panama became the backdrop to one of the darkest moments in television history. The show was in full swing when the host, Jean-Philippe, suddenly walked onto the stage holding a microphone, his face unusually serious. The contestants paused mid-challenge, confusion and concern written across their faces as they gathered around him. The crowd quieted and viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. Something was wrong. The news he delivered wasn't about the game or anyone in the studio. It was bigger, heavier. A Chilean Air Force military plane, the Casa 212, had disappeared. Among the 21 passengers on board were reporters, military personnel, and beloved Chilean TV host Felipe Camiroaga from Good Morning Everyone. They had been on their way to Juan Fernandez Island to document earthquake recovery efforts after the devastating 8.8 magnitude quake that struck Chile. The Casa 212 had departed Santiago at 2 p.m. and attempted to land twice on the island. But strong winds and heavy rain made a safe landing impossible. On the third attempt, the plane turned around and vanished into the vast ocean. Hours later, air traffic control lost contact. There were no survivors. The live broadcast of K7 Panama turned into a moment of collective national grief. The usually upbeat host, Jean-Philippe, struggled to keep his voice steady as he relayed the tragic details to the nation. Rescue teams were dispatched immediately. Boats scoured the ocean, finding scattered luggage and personal belongings floating in the waves. Days later, pieces of the wreckage were discovered, an intact door, knapsacks, and eventually the bodies of some passengers. But perhaps the most haunting discovery came from divers who recovered a camera from the wreckage. It contained footage filmed just moments before the crash. Smiling faces, casual conversations, and candid shots of the passengers painted a heartbreaking picture of their final moments. None of them knew what was coming. For many, the abrupt interruption of K7 Panama remains etched in memory. It wasn't just a tragedy, it was a moment where the boundaries of entertainment and real-life horror collided on live television. And here's something to think about. How fragile are the moments we take for granted? One minute you're cheering for a game show team, and the next you're mourning a national tragedy. The tragic fall of Tetsushi Yanagida. What occurs when the boundary between entertainment and danger blurs? In June 2008, Japanese TV host Tetsushi Yanagida experienced this lesson during a live broadcast that went tragically wrong. It was a sunny Saturday, and the show had taken to the picturesque rice fields of Japan for an outdoor segment. The game was simple. Two contestants stood back-to-back on a small wooden platform surrounded by shallow, muddy water. The goal: shove your opponent into the sludge without turning around. It was light-hearted, silly, and good fun for everyone watching. As the round wrapped up, the contestants turned their attention to the show's charismatic host, Tetsushi Yanagida. The crowd chanted and cheered, urging him to join the game. After a little playful resistance, Tetsushi gave in, climbed onto the platform, and squared up for his turn. But from the moment he stepped up, it was clear he was at a disadvantage. The wooden platform was already tilted, and his footing was shaky. As the challenge began, Tetsushi lost his balance almost immediately. In a split-second decision, he lunged forward in a diving position to break his fall. What he didn't realize was how shallow the water was. His head hit the thick mud below with incredible force, crushing his neck. His body went completely limp, and his face remained submerged in just 6 inches of muddy water. And here's where the tragedy becomes even more heartbreaking. No one realized he was hurt. The other contestants and crew assumed he was joking, playing dead for laughs. They piled on, pushing his head further into the sludge, throwing mud on top of him and laughing along. Tetsushi, paralyzed and unable to move, couldn't cry out or signal for help. Eventually, someone lifted him briefly out of the water, and he managed to let out a faint cry. But even then, they thought he was playing along with the gag. They dropped him back into the mud, where he lay face first, struggling to breathe. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, someone realized something was terribly wrong. Tetsushi was pulled from the water, motionless and barely alive. The broadcast abruptly cut back to the studio, leaving viewers stunned and confused. Tetsushi was rushed to intensive care. His neck had been severely damaged, and the impact left him paralyzed from the neck down. But Tetsushi's story didn't end there. Despite the devastating injury, he adapted to his new reality and even made appearances back on the show that nearly cost him his life. His resilience became an inspiration to many, but the haunting footage of that day remains difficult to watch. So, here's the uncomfortable truth. When does entertainment cross the line into recklessness? And how often do we, as viewers, forget that behind the fun and games are real people with real risks? Bobcat Goldthwait's infamous Tonight Show stunt. Late-night talk shows are supposed to be easygoing, a place where celebrities share stories and promote their latest projects. But sometimes things take a turn no one expects. In 1994, The Tonight Show with Jay Leno became the stage for one of the wildest and most dangerous moments in late-night TV history, all thanks to comedian Bobcat Goldthwait. Bobcat wasn't your typical guest. Known for his raspy voice, unpredictable energy, and bizarre sense of humor, he had built a reputation for chaos wherever he went. That night, Jay Leno welcomed him with the usual warmth, but it didn't take long for things to go sideways. As Bobcat settled into his seat, he started sharing a story about how he had smashed some TV sets during a previous interview. He joked that pulling wild stunts was practically his ticket to staying relevant in the talk show circuit. The audience laughed, Jay chuckled nervously, and everything seemed on brand for the unpredictable comedian. But then Bobcat started fidgeting in his pocket. He pulled out a lighter, then lighter fluid. Jay, still holding onto the thin thread of humor, asked if Bobcat considered himself a role model. Bobcat grinned and replied, "I'm an excellent role model for young children." And then he doused his chair in lighter fluid and set it on fire. Flames shot up and the audience collectively gasped. Jay Leno and fellow guest Lauren Hutton sprang into action, grabbing their mugs of water and desperately trying to put out the fire. Bobcat, meanwhile, found the entire thing hilarious. The fire was extinguished before it could spread, but the damage was done, both literally and figuratively. Jay forced Bobcat to sit back down in the now soaked chair as punishment. But Bobcat wasn't done being Bobcat. He dramatically walked off set, only to slip and fall on the wet floor. The cameras caught it all. The consequences came swiftly. Bobcat Goldthwait was banned from The Tonight Show permanently. But the fallout didn't stop there. He was charged with arson, making him the first guest in the show's history to face criminal charges. The bill? $2,700 in fines from the Burbank courthouse, $698 to NBC for the damaged chair, and nearly $500 to the city of Burbank for the investigation. On top of that, he was placed on 3 years of probation and had to film public service announcements promoting fire safety. Fire officials later confirmed that if Jay and Lauren hadn't acted so quickly, the fire could have spiraled out of control. What started as an edgy attempt at humor turned into a lesson in just how fast chaos can ignite. Literally? Looking back, the incident is equal parts bizarre, reckless, and unforgettable. The Bradford Stadium fire. Imagine a bright Saturday afternoon, the air buzzing with excitement, and thousands of fans gathered to celebrate a football season's grand finale. It was May 11, 1985, at Valley Parade Stadium in Bradford, England. Bradford City had just secured their divisional championship, and their loyal supporters filled the stands, eager to cheer their team one last time before the season ended. But amidst the cheers and laughter, no one could have predicted how quickly joy would turn into horror. The stadium itself was no gem. It was old, worn down, and neglected. The wooden stands were weathered and fragile, and beneath them lay heaps of garbage accumulated over an entire season. Everyone knew the place needed an upgrade, but plans for reconstruction were still just that, plans. And so fans sat shoulder to shoulder on those creaky wooden bleachers, unaware of the danger lurking just beneath them. As the match played on, and commentator John Helm excitedly narrated each play, somewhere in the crowd, a spectator lit his last cigarette. With a casual flick, he sent the still glowing cigarette butt tumbling through a gap in the stands. Normally, this might not have been cause for concern, but Valley Parade wasn't like other stadiums. The smoldering cigarette landed on the piles of dry trash below, a perfect recipe for disaster. Within moments, a small flame began to dance below the bleachers. Helm's voice shifted from excitement to unease as smoke started to rise. Cameras turned away from the pitch and focused on the growing fire. What started as a flicker quickly turned into an uncontrollable inferno, fed by the wind and the aged wooden structure above. In less than 2 minutes, the entire stand was ablaze. Flames licked the sky, black smoke billowed across the pitch, and panic erupted. Fans scrambled over each other, desperate to escape. Children were hoisted above heads, strangers helped strangers, and some people froze in fear. The heat was unbearable, the smoke was choking, and the exits were too few. Tom Delahunty, covering the match for radio, went from play-by-play commentary to shouting warnings. "Slow down, watch the children," he cried as chaos unfolded before him. By the time firefighters arrived, the damage was catastrophic. The fire had consumed everything in its path. The aftermath was heartbreaking. 56 lives were lost, and over 200 people were injured. Families shattered, a city in mourning, and a nation asking one painful question: how did this happen? An inquiry soon followed. It revealed shocking truths. The club had been warned about the trash buildup under the stands. The dangers were clear, yet no action had been taken. The inquiry held the football club 2/3 responsible, with the local council also shouldering the blame. But something had to change. The tragedy led to significant reforms in stadium safety. Wooden stands were banned, smoking was prohibited at sporting grounds, and stricter safety standards were enforced across the UK. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe. See ya.